Having NPCs and dialogue are so important to having creativity, personality, and having a storyline in any game. So today I wanted to go over how to create this NPC who has dialogue step by step in this video. And let's just get started. But real quick, if you could subscribe and drop a like so YouTube can help push this video to more aspiring game developers, then it would mean the world. But let's get started with this tutorial. Okay, so first let's actually create the NPC, and let's create our NPC to have like a free roaming movement. So we're going to make a character body 2D, and this character body 2D is going to be titled NPC. And, well, we're going to have different stuff like an animated sprite. So we're going to do an animated sprite. And for these frames, I'm going to actually import another piece of art that we don't already have in the game. Because we're going to be able to find this in the itch.io, which if you want to go download, you'll be able to download. It's called the Human Worker Red. And if we, move this in, it's the Human Worker Red PNG. And you can find this on the itch.io page in the link in the description. So you can have the exact same art that we do in this entire game. Move that into the characters folder. And then we'll go up to our NPC, our animated sprite. We'll go to animations. We'll click new sprite frames. And we're going to create a new set of sprite frames. So first we're going to have idle. Idle, I'm going to set to 2 frames a second because we're only going to have 2 frames. And it's going to look kind of weird if we have a bunch of, because it's going to be moving extremely quick. And I'll show you here in just a second. But we're going to use these 2 frames for idle. And if we come up here to our NPC, you can kind of see how this works. And these are not going to be the idle frames. So I hit the wrong frames. The idle frames are going to be the very first 2. So I guess I did not hit the very first 2. So these are going to be the idle frames right here. And as you can see, that's kind of an idle. If we have it at 5, it's going to be much quicker and it's not going to look right. So we're going to go with 2. Then we're going to create a new animation. We're going to say this walk east. And walk east is going to be our east animations. And we're just going to do this for all the directions that we have to walk. So these are going to be the east walk. Then we're going to have a new set of animations. We're going to have walk north, or walk in for walk north. And walk north is going to be the exact same thing, which is going to be these ones here, right? Because the player's facing up. And I'm going to finish off the last 2 just real quick. Okay, so now that our frames are completed, we're going to go back to our NPC. We're going to add a collision shape. And this collision shape is just going to be a small little bump on the NPC, just like this. So our player can't bump or like go straight through it. We're going to have an area 2D. And this area 2D is going to be for our chat detection. So we're going to detect when the player's in the area. So we'll just call it the chat detection area, and this chat detection area is going to have a collision shape, and this collision shape is going to be decently big but not too big. So maybe like if the player is within this range, we're going to be able to chat with the NPC. And then we're going to want to have a timer, and this timer is going to be set to auto start. And now we're going to save the scene into our scenes folder. We're going to go up to our NPC. We're going to create a new script. We're going to name this npc.gd, and all of this in here we can remove because we're going to create our own script where our enemy has different, or where our NPC has different states and it moves in different directions randomly. So we'll say constant, and this is going to be our speed. We'll equal it to 30 for now, and then we can always come back and change this if it doesn't look right. And then we're going to have a var current state, so we know what current state the NPC's in. And this is not going to work because we need an enum, right? Because we're going to have our different states. So if we come down here, we create an enum. We're going to have idle. We're going to have new direction state, where it's choosing a new direction, and then we're going to have the move state, right? So now that should take away the air, and we're going to have 2 more variables. One for var is roaming, and then we're going to have var is chatting, and the is chatting at the very start of the game is going to be equal to false, and the is roaming one is going to be equal to true because we're going to be roaming around the map when we first enter the game. Then we're going to have a variable for the player, which we'll set later once we know what the player is. And then we're going to have a var for if the player is our player in chat zone, right? So we'll have a variable so know if the player is in the chat zone or not. And then real quick, we're going to come down here. We're going to create a ready function. So this is going to be our ready function. And this ready function is just going to have a randomize. So we randomize every single time, and it's not just the same exact thing over and over. So we're going to randomize. And then we're also going to have to create up here another variable real quick. 2 more variables actually. I completely forgot. We're going to have a var direction. and direction is going to be equal to vector2 dot right, and then we're going to have a var start position, and that's not going to be equal to anything because we're going to make it equal to something right here. And we'll say start position is going to equal the current position of the NPC, so we know where the start position is. And this is only going to be used, which we're not technically going to use this because we're just going to let our enemy roam around wherever it wants to go, because that's going to be used if you want the enemy to only go like 50 pixels away from the start, so it doesn't roam around the entire map, it only roams around in a little box area, right? So that's just if you want to do that, and I'll tell you how to implement that here in a minute. But now we're going to come down here and we're going to create another function, and this is going to be our process function. And in our process function, we're going to say for our animations, we're going to say if the current state is equal to 0 or current state is equal to 1, then we're going to say animated sprite dot play, and we're going to play the idle animation, because this means if it's equal to 0 or 1, that means we're going to be either idle or we're going to be choosing a new direction. We're not going to be moving. So that's what we want, right? And we're going to come down here and we're going to say else if current state is equal to 2 and is not chatting. So if we're not chatting, then we're going to say our walking animations, right? So we're going to check the direction. So direction.x equals to -1. So if the direction.x equals -1, that means we're going to be moving west. So say animated sprite dot play walk west. Then we can come down here, direction.x equals +1. This means we're going to be moving east. So we can say animated sprite.2d dot play walk east. And then we can say same thing for dot y equals -1. Or I guess we can do, yeah, we'll do -1 just to keep it in order. And we'll say animated sprite dot north dot play walk north. Ooh. Okay, let's see. Walk north, right? And then just one more for the final y, which is going to be +1, and we're going to play south, right? So now our animation should technically work. Let's see what's happening. So now we're getting some error. So assignment is not allowed inside an expression. If current, okay, so yeah, so we have to say equal. We have to have double equal sign. That is my bad. We forgot the double equal sign, but that's going to be that, right? So now we're going to have in our process function, we're going to be choosing the state. So we're going to say if roaming, so which means we're not chatting and we're roaming. We're going to say match the current state, because this is going to change the state in order. So we're going to say idle. So if we're on idle, we're just going to pass. Nothing's going to happen. If we're on new direction, then we're going to want to change our direction, and we're going to have to create another function for this. So I guess we'll write it out. So we'll call this function choose, and this choose is going to choose a random one from the array. So it's going to choose a random direction from the array. So for this, we can just send in our array. We can say vector2.right, and then we can say vector2.up, vector2.left, and vector2.down, just like this. And then that's going to be a new function that we're going to have to create, and then we're going to have our move state. So if we're in the move state, we're just going to call another function, which is going to move, and we're going to pass delta through it, and we'll make the move function here in just a second as well. Okay, so none of this is even in our function, which is an issue. I did not even realize this. I don't think it is, so we'll say function prop. Okay, so this is going to be a pain now, because none of this was even in our function, which is not good. So we'll say function process, and then that's going to have delta, just like this. So it should be just like this. Hopefully this takes away an error. Let's see. Okay, so is chatting, is this what we have? Okay, so let me see what's going on. Okay, so this is what's going on. We have function like written out multiple times. Okay, so this should work. Okay, there we go. So now it's going to come down and give us our error for the choose functions and stuff. And we're going to create a new function for choose. And choose is going to take an array, right? And inside of choose function, we're going to say array.shuffle. So it's going to mix it around which is shuffles the Godot command or Godot function, and then we're going to just return our array dot whatever's in the very front. So it's going to shuffle it around, then it's going to return the very first one. So it's going to choose a random one. And then for our move function, this one's going to be a little bit more complex because it's going to be our actual moving. And we're going to want to pass through delta through our move function from our process function. And in our move function, we'll just say for now, if not is chatting. Right, so if we're not chatting, then we're going to say position plus equals direction times speed times delta, right? And then that should work, right? So we should be able to move. We should play our animations. We should be choosing a random direction. We should be cycling through the states at a random order once we set up our timer. We do not have the timer yet, so that's not exactly going to work yet, but we're almost there. We have just one more function, and the last function is our chat detection area. So we're going to go to our node, we're going to say body entered, and we're going to signal this to our NPC, and then we're also going to signal body exited to our NPC as well. And in body entered, basically all we're going to have in this function is to check if the player's in the zone. So we're going to say if body dot has method player, and we're going to say player equals body. Then we're going to say player in chat zone equals true. And that's good for this. And then whenever we exit, we're going to want body dot has method. And keep in mind, I'm going to explain this here in just a minute a little bit better. Like, we're going to go through it in order of how it works. We're going to say player in chat zone. So if the player leaves the zone, then we're going to want to say player in chat zone equals false because the player is no longer in chat zone. And to actually cycle through the cycles, we're going to go to our timer. We're going to send a signal from our timer node. And in this function, we're just going to say something like, we're going to set the timer to a random wait time. So we're going to say timer.wait time is going to equal, we're going to call it choose function again, and we're going to pass through another array. So it's going to choose a random time, right? And we'll say 0.5, 1, and 1.5. Right, so we'll just have these times, so it'll choose a random one from these times. So it's going to look completely random, and then we'll say current state is going to equal the choose function again, and we're going to pass through another array, and this is where we're just going to choose the state. So we'll say new direction, and we'll say move. Right. Theoretically, everything should work. So if we go to our world, we save the scene again, we instance this into our world, we instance the NPC scene into our world, and we come over here, we can move the NPC around a little bit, like to here. We play the scene, we're going to see that we have animations are working to start. So the animations are working. It's going to move around, which looks good, which looks very good. And let's see. Okay, so it's going to move around random. Okay, you can see it's kind of roaming around and it's going to maybe stop. Okay, it stops, plays back to idle. Okay, see, look at this. So now we have a moving animation, but we cannot talk to it. So this is the last thing we're going to do before we start the dialogue. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the script, and this is going to be actually pretty easy. We're going to come up here below the if is roaming in our process. And in process, we're going to check input. So we're going to say basically if input dot is action pressed. Or we'll say just pressed, and we'll say chat. We'll have to go make this in the settings. We're going to say print chatting with NPC, and we're going to say is roaming is going to equal to false, and we're going to say is chatting is equal to true, and basically we're going to end up playing our animated sprite dot play idle. But this should, you probably won't need this line of code because we've already called it up here. I guess we have, or I guess it won't move. So that's the only reason we call this now is because if the player's in the middle of walking, if he's in the walking animation and we do it, it's just going to stop in the walking animation if we don't call it. So that's why we're going to call it, because up here obviously it would call it, but we don't have a chatting state. So that's why we're calling it down here. And we're going to have to go to project settings, input map, filter by name. We'll add a new action. We'll name this chat. And we will create this to be the C button. Okay, close. Now if we go back to our world, we play, the NPC is done itself. So the NPC is completely done. You can see it's walking. I'm going to try and chat with it when it's walking. You see, so I chatted with it when it was walking. It went straight back to the normal idle. And if we turn these back to true, If we turn this one back to true, this one back to false, which we'll do after the dialogue's finished, then it's going to go back to just roaming around the map, which completely random, which is exactly what we want. So now we're going to go through and we're going to create dialogue. Okay, so now for the dialogue part, since we have our NPC, we're going to come down here and we're going to create a new folder. And I'm going to name this folder dialogue, because this is going to store all of our dialogue files that we're going to have for our dialogue system. And I want to go up to the very top and we're going to create a new scene. And this scene is going to be a control node. So it's going to be a green node. This control right here, it's going to be a control node, right? And on our control node, we can name this something like dialogue, because it's going to be the dialogue chat box. So you can name it dialogue chat box, dialogue UI, whatever, you know, you want your dialogue to be named. We're going to name it that. And then we're going to add a 9 patch rect. And for our 9 patch rect, this is going to be the background of our dialogue. And inside of our 9 patch rect, we're going to have 2 text labels for our name and our text, or whatever the chat is. But let's set up our 9 patch rect. And for our 9 patch rect, I'm going to come down here, I'm going to load, and I'm actually going to end up loading our inventory background, because it's going to work multi-purpose, as you can see. And we're going to come down to our patch margin, and we can just change all this to like 3. All right, whoops, 3. And you can kind of see how this is going to work for all of them, and it's going to make all the sides so we can expand it, right? Fun. So I'm going to move this just slightly above the bottom, so when we import it into our NPC scene, if we save this scene, so we can save our dialogue scene, and we'll save it into our dialogue folder just to stay organized. We can go to our NPC, we can actually import our dialogue.tsc in, and you can kind of see the size of the chat box that is going to be. So that's about the size of the chat box, and I guess that's going to work for now. We can always come back and change it, maybe rise it up a little bit more, just like this. And then we're going to go into our 9 patch rect, and we're going to add a rich text label. And this first rich text label is going to be for our name, right? Or we can just say name here. And we can go into our text and we can say name, because it's going to be a placeholder for now. And we can make the text smaller and then pull it more apart. And to make this smaller, we can go to our layout, we can go to our transform, and we can actually change up the scale to maybe 0.2, and that's going to be way too small, so maybe we'll go with like 0.4. That looks better. Maybe 0.5 for the name and then 0.4 for the chat. So we'll put the name here, right? So this will be the name whenever we have our placeholder, and then we can add another rich text label, and this rich text label is going to be for our text. And our text rich text label, we can come over here and we can say something like chatting ... And we can come down to layout, we can go to transform, and we can change up the scale to maybe 0.4, right? Just a little bit less than the name, so it's a little bit smaller, maybe even lower than that. We'll stick with this, and we can always come back and change it. So we'll do this, right? So we'll have the name, and then we'll have the chat up here a little bit below the name. Okay, so now that we have our scene complete, we're going to go into our notes. We're going to create a note, just a normal note on your computer. And we're going to end up changing this into a script in a minute, but this is going to be what we, can move into the Godot. And just real quickly, we can either write it out in here by doing this, by doing some brackets, and then in the middle of these brackets, by doing a curly bracket, and then whatever the name, so we can say name, right? We can name whatever we're about to say. So the name is going to be the worker, because it's going to be the worker, right? So that's the name variable. We want the name variable to equal the worker when we come in to the script. So when we pull the name variable, we're going to pull worker, right? So that's how it's going to work. And then when we pull the text variable from these are going to each be arrays. Then it's going to say whatever we want it to say, and we'll just say hello there, just like this. And then we can do a comma, and then we can come down here. And we can do the exact same thing, and we can start another line. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually import this into Godot, and then we can edit it in Godot so it looks a little bit more neat. So to do that, we can save the scene. And down here where it says save, we can come and we can rename it, and we can say worker dialogue 1.json. That's the important part. It has to be a JSON file. We can save it as all files, just like this, and then we can save it, right? And then we can close out of this because it's saved. And then you want to go into your file system wherever it's at, and you're going to want to pull it into Godot. So let me go get it from our file system, and you can see that this is the script that we just created. And if we bring it in, you can kind of see worker dialog1 JSON. We bring it into dialog. And if we click on it, double click on the JSON file, you're going to see it's going to pull up in Godot and it's going to work in Godot just like it would in the scripting that we had, right? So we obviously have an error up here, but we didn't close off the parentheses. But then now we can write the script out in here. So I'm going to come back and I'll write out the script. You want to write it in this exact same style. I'll time lapse it so you can copy it word from word. And I'll be right back with, you know, some dialogue. Okay, and this is going to be our JSON file. So we can save. You can kind of see how it works. So this is going to be the name that's going to appear in our name slot. And this is going to be, you know, it's going to say you and it's going to say worker at different parts. And then this is the text that's going to appear in the text spot, as you can see with the text variables in the name variable. And I'll show you how we're going to, you know, pull this out of this script here in just a second in our dialog script. So we're going to click on our dialog. We're going to create a new script up here at the top. And we're going to name this dialog.gd because we'll save it inside the dialog folder. But we'll name it dialog player.gd because it's, why not, right? It's going to be our player script. This is what's going to play the script. And in this script, well, we're going to want to first bring in our JSON file that we just created. And to bring in our JSON file, we're going to create an export variable. And this export, or actually an export file, not a variable. So we're going to have an export file. And this file that we're going to export is going to be a JSON file, right? So we can say quotes, and then we can star.json because that's going to be the file name, and we can name this file as our file, right? Our dialog file, so d file. And then we're going to have another script which is going to be var dialog. So we're going to pull this into an array or into a list. So we can just do this for now, and then we'll bring it in later, and we'll say var current dialog, and the current dialog here is going to be for whatever dialog we're on, and we're going to check the list that's in the array so we know when or how far we are till the end of the dialog. We're going to have a function which is going to be our ready function, and in this ready function we'll call the start, and we don't have a start, so we'll go to functions, we'll create a start, and basically when we start we're going to want dialog to equal load dialog, right? And obviously load dialog is going to be another function, but we're going to equal dialog to load dialog. And what we're going to do, so dialog is going to equal whatever dialog we want to load. So we're going to say that when we load dialog, we're going to have to create a new function for this, right? So we'll say load dialog, and to load the dialog, yeah, it's okay. So to load the dialog, we're going to first say var file, and file is going to be file access. I'll explain this here in just a second, right? So file access dot open, and we're going to open our file. So we can drag in our dialog1 here. We have too many parentheses on the end. But yeah, we can bring in our file, right? So that's going to be our file that we want to open. And inside of here, we can do file access is going to be read, because we don't want it to change up the file. So we just want it to dot read, right? Just like this. So that's going to look good. And then if we come down a line, we're going to have to say var, okay, it wasn't loading. We're going to say var content equals JSON. So whatever we want to pass back through to our dialog. So we'll say var JSON dot file dot get as text. So we'll bring it in as text. And then what you're going to see here is if we return the content, then it's going to come back into our dialog, right? So dialog is going to equal whatever the content is, right? And the content is going to get whatever we want out of the file as strings so we can put them onto our UI, right? So, and then whenever we start, we were going to want current dialog ID to equal to -1, and we're going to call the next script. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to call the next script, and if we're at -1, when we call the next script is going to be 0, and the very first thing in an array is 0, so it's going to call the very first line, right? So if we come down here, create a new function, we're going to say next script, And our next script is going to consist of a couple different things, right? So our next script is going to say current dialogue is going to plus equal 1. So we're going to add 1 to our current dialogue. So next time we click on next script is going to bring in the next line of dialogue. And we can say if current dialogue.id is greater than or equal to the length of whatever dialogue is, then we're going to want to return. And eventually this is where we'll come back here in a little bit and we're going to end it. So for now, we'll just return. But in a minute, we're going to come back and we're going to end it here, right? So this is where the script's going to end. This is where the dialogue's going to hide, and it's going to give control back to the NPC. And down here, we can just say our 9patchrect / name dot text. We can change the text to equal dialogue. And we want this to equal current dialogue ID. I don't know why it's not autofilling for me, but current dialogue ID. And we also want it to equal the name, because what we're going to do is we're going to take the name from whatever it is in the script. So this is what we called it in the script, right? Name. So that's what we're going to take. We're going to take the current dialogue ID. So it's going to be the very first item from the script, and it's going to take the very first item's name. And basically we can copy and paste this because it's going to be almost the same, except over here in our JSON script, we called it text, and right here in our game, it's also called text. So now, theoretically, this should work. Let's also add one more function, and this function is going to be our input function. So we were able to go through the dialogue. So we'll say if event.is action pressed, and for now we can just say UI accept. Then we'll call the next script. And if we play the scene, F6, we're not going to be able to see it because it's up here. So that's going to be an issue. But for a minute, we can just move it. Select the children, and we can move it down here a little bit. We can go to our layout. We can go to our transform, and we can scale this up by 4. Right, now we're going to be able to see it. So now if we click F6, you're going to see that it loads in worker and hello there. If we click enter, it's going to keep going through, go through. And you can kind of see how this is messed up, and that is a very, very easy fix. And to do this, we can change our text to come all the way down to here. And now, if we click play one more time, you're going to kind of see that hello there. I'm just walking around looking for the red company. We're out here chopping trees down. What? Yeah, we've got to make a profit somehow, but I've got to get back to work, so take care. And then if we click enter, it doesn't hide, but that's what we're about to do, and we're about to connect it to the player. So let's put this back. Let's say the size back to 1. Let's set the position back to where it was up here, about right there. And let's finish off the script so that it's able to actually work with the player. So to do this, well, we're going to come up to our variables, and we're going to create a new variable. This variable is going to be, say, dialogue active. It's going to be checking if our dialogue is active, and that's going to start off as false. And inside of our ready function, we're going to remove the start function, because whenever the dialogue scene's first loaded into the game, we don't want to automatically call the start function. So we also want to just double check that the 9patchrect is equal to false, dot visible is equal to false. And then in our start function, we're going to say if d active, then we can return. But if d active equals true. So if d active, then we'll return because we're already in the animation. But if it's not, then it's going to come down past this, and it's going to set deactive to true, right? And then it's going to finish off the rest of our start function. And then same thing down here in input. We don't want to be able to click it if we're not active in the dialogue, right? So we'll say return, and that's all there. And then we can come down here, and in our next script, this is going to be a pretty big change, because this is where we're going to actually end off the animation. And you can kind of see that we're going to say once the dialogue ends, because after we get into this if function, the dialogue's ended, we want dialogue active to equal to false. And we're going to want to emit a signal so that we're able to, or we also want our 9patchrect here. 9patchrect dot visible to equal to false because the animation's over. And we want to emit a signal that dialogue is finished. So we can come up here, we can create a new signal, and we can say dialogue finished. And then down here, we can emit this signal. So we can emit signal, dialogue finished. And we can connect this signal to our NPC. So everything should technically work, but we got to go to our NPC. We're going to go to our node and we're going to say dialogue finished. We're going to connect it to the NPC script. And when the dialogue is finished, right, we're going to go back and we're going to change our is chatting variable to false. And we're going to change our is roaming variable to true. And now our NPC is going to return back to normal the moment we end the moment we go through our dialogue. So if we click play in our world, we're going to see that we have a NPC. We're going to watch him move around for a second. Hopefully he moves. Okay, so he's moving around. If we click C to chat, nothing happens, and that is not exactly the best. So we can kind of see where we went wrong. Well, chat, we don't ever call the chatting, right? So we never open up the dialogue. So to do this, we can just come into our is chatting with NPC, and we're going to have to add a command here. We're going to say our dialogue. Let's go back to our NPC. We're going to say dialogue.start. So we're going to call the start function in our dialogue. Now, if we go back to the world, theoretically, everything should work. If we click C, it still does not work. So it says we're chatting with the NPC. So obviously we're calling something wrong. If we go back to our NPC, we go back to our dialogue. Start function, if deactive, then it's going to return. Deactive equals true. Dialogue equals load dialogue. Current dialogue equals 1. Next script. Okay, so we call the start function, right? Let's print to see if we get into the start function. Let's go back to our, I think this is in our slime, just so we can remove what's already being processed. Or maybe this is in our player. Yeah, print local mouse position. And we can go back to our world, click play. Does that go through? Well, it does go through. So something's not starting with the player and it's not showing visible. So that's the issue. So somewhere we're not changing it to visible, which should be a very, very easy fix. And I think I know exactly where we went wrong. In our start function, we don't change it to visible. So we can just, that is the easiest fix ever. We can just say 9patchrec.visible is going to equal to true. Just like this. And then if we go back to our world, we click play. We click play. If we click C, you can kind of see how the enemy stopped, right? It was walking and it stopped because we entered dialogue. Click enter, we can go through the dialogues, we get to the end and it closes out and the enemy goes back to walking, right? So let me try and talk to the enemy when it's in a walking stage, right? So the moment it starts walking. Let's see if we can get it. We talk to it. See, the moment it starts walking, it goes back into the idle stage because we want it to be an idle when we're talking to it. And it'll be idle for as long as we're in the dialogue. So that is everything for this tutorial. And I really do hope that this helped you learn to make NPCs, learn to help you make dialogue, learn to help you make, you know, different stuff in Godot that is going to be useful for your game development journey. And if you have any questions about this video or you want to implement something else into the video, then please let me know and I will get back to you in the comments to help you out. But I hope this video did help. I really, really do hope this video helped. And if you could, go down below, hit the subscribe button, drop a like, then it would mean the absolute world to me. But until next time, I hope you guys stay safe and have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.